Hello and welcome to Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin and this is the show where you can have your property related questions answered by a team of property experts. And joining me today is Sara Newson, MD and founder of Realm 47 Property Investment Group. Welcome to you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me here.
You've come all the way from York.
I have this morning.
How was the journey?
It was wonderful, actually. No delays.
Trains
no train
working?
delays. They were working
Wow.
just fine. Yeah.
That's good news. Well, good to have you on. And joining Sara is John Reynolds, CEO of Titan Developments. Welcome back to you, John.
Thanks, Steve.
Good to have you in the studio again.
Good to be back.
And I trust our number one fan, Mrs. Reynolds, is watching today.
Of course, your biggest fan, Stephen.
Great stuff. Okay, well, at least somebody's watching the programme, that's for sure. Okay, John, we're going to start with you. You're going to love this. What do the panel think will be the major difficulties facing residential developers in 2024?
Yeah, where do you go with that? Residential developers in 2024, I think you've got to work back from what the developer's trying to achieve, what their product is. So in context of how tough conditions are, we've got the interest rates still high, so the cost of borrowing.
Do you think they are high?
In context of what everyone got used to.
All right.
So if you were a developer, and I think that's where the question's loaded, right? It was potentially a bit easier 2, 3, 5 years ago. So if you're a developer borrowing money, in terms of a development loan, or if you are a buyer, which ultimately is the exit and your ultimately affordability, then there's the challenges. So I think the developer's got to just really know what their exit is and actually really know what the exit number is for their product without wanting to sound like a surveyor, that kind of comparable and actually really knowing what the realistic achievable price is. You've got to be right on that because actually the surveyor could be the biggest enemy.
I think the worry that I have is that what's gone hand in hand with a higher interest rate, lenders are also being quite meticulous about how they appraise what you want to do.
Yeah.
And that's becoming more and more difficult. Not perhaps for the likes of these big guys here that are doing 70 or 80 stories and 600 flats in a block, but for the, shall we say, small to medium developer.
Sure.
They've got so many constraints on them now, with all sorts of conditions to the lending. And as you say, interest rates have gone up from virtually 0 to 5-6%, or probably a payable rate of somewhere around 7 or 8% for the majority of developers, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
So quite difficult times.
Difficult times, and I think also, you mentioned all the different kind of constraints and so on. I think the kind of green products that you've got to be looking to use, that actually whether you're being encouraged to use them and want to be the developer that's using it, or actually the demand for it from the buyer is there as well. So certain people really are wanting green materials, green construction in their product. It's difficult to do that in Canary Wharf en masse, but if you're doing a development locally to where you live, that might be something that's really
well,
key.
They do want it, but nobody wants to pay for it, do they?
That's a conversation we've had before. That's all part of making the appraisal work. So back to the question, I think, if you're a developer, how do you fit in the key parts that will give you a saleable product at the price that you know you can achieve? And you really need to stress test that more than ever before.
Yeah. How do you stress test it, John?
I think you've got to dial into the local agents. You've got to look at actual sales comparables. So don't take a 6-month spread. Look at what's sold. So if you're doing a 4-bedroom house in a road where you can see that others have sold in that road, how does it compare to what you're doing? And what did it sell for? Not what was it asking, but what did it actually sell for? Yeah. And what did they do in terms of actual specification and so on? Because if you've got your own innovative idea, is now the time to be trying that in this market.
But the whole market is so volatile. I mean, where I live across the road here, I actually had a look on, I think it was Rightmove, at the history of the development's prices. And I mean, what was quite interesting was they said in the 10 years that it had been built, it had actually gone down 49% in terms of value, and 30% of that was last year. Now, that's that. However, the next month, going up 10-15%. So it's quite a volatile place to be, isn't it?
It is. Volatile is a good word. It's tough because I think I've used this already in context of this conversation, but if you're going back and looking at historical side of things, you've got to try and work out what's happening right now.
Yeah.
You'd like to think that people are talking about interest rates coming down a bit, and people got used to it, and then working with that, people still need somewhere to live.
Yeah.
Whether it's a change of job or people moving from sort of upsizing to a property, but ultimately you've got to be bang on your numbers. And I think the other thing as well, which answers the question, is the cost of materials and the supply chain issues. They haven't gone away. They've calmed down because there's less development.
I don't know how you work that out.
Contingency is key, right? So in any development appraisal, put in at least 10% and be sensible, because sometimes you can be trying to make a deal work. So you're working back from a GDV, a gross development value. And then you kind of think, I really want to, it could be that I want to make this deal work. And actually, if we remove this, remove that, be careful.
So, me in particular, I'm always accused of being a bit London-centric about these things. And he's probably the same in a way. So, let's go up to York. And are developers having difficult times up there? Is the adoption of sort of green practices within the building sort of commonplace? Or?
Yeah, it's happening, but I think you hit the nail on the head. Are people prepared to pay for it? Because it is going to add a cost to the property. I think developers are a bit smaller up north, generally speaking, and a lot of the issues are obviously the issues they've always had down to planning, finding the properties or the land, and workmen as well. They're struggling to find people. When we're doing smaller developments, we're struggling to find contractors to actually work on site, and good quality contractors as well. I think that's becoming quite an issue.
Yeah. Okay, all right. Thank you both for that. So we'll move on. Sara, your first question. Again, lovely. The Bank of England has said that cheaper mortgages will not appear until at least mid-2025 or perhaps even later. Is this having a stalling effect on all aspects of the property investment market?
Interesting one. So from my perspective, I've seen mortgage rates coming down recently in the property investment market. So we've been selling properties recently, small HMOs, and securing rates of 4.79%, 4.99% for 5-year fixed. And for me, that's a good rate. I think in the 4 or 5%, if you take us back sort of 15 years, that was really commonplace.
Yeah.
So, from my perspective, I think that the rates are pretty good at the moment. I have seen an influx of investors coming back in the market since the latest Bank of England base rate announcement. We've had a lot of people wanting to go for the higher cash flow sort of strategies like HMOs, SA. But what this February announcement did was bring more of the buy-to-let sort of standard resi family home investors back into the market. And I honestly think that we might see the market more buoyant in terms of mortgage rates for investors now. Yes, it's steady. The investment market is steady, but it's certainly moving.
Do you know? I have a great sort of sympathy for you having to advise people on investing. I mean, what did we have? We have the government jumping in saying we're going to have all this retrospective insulation requirement. A lot of people came out of the market, sold their portfolios, even at a loss, because they just knew they wouldn't be able to conform to the new regulations. And then the government just changed their mind, actually. I mean, how do you cope with that as an investment advisor?
It's like the Wild West, isn't it?
At
times.
It is.
I honestly, with all the talks that are going on in the government, I always say to people, hold. And I sound like something off Braveheart. I'm literally standing there at the front going, hold, 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 because it is not policy until the final man speaks. And I just keep saying, don't worry yourselves with it, because it will come and go, especially this year. With the potential change in government, things will be rushed through. New government will come in and they will reverse things, which is what happened last time when Labour left. They rushed in planning permission for HMOs. Then the new government came in, they turned it into permitted development. So it's a difficult one, but I just tell them not to get too overly consumed by what's going on in the media.
Sure.
That's good advice.
I mean, coming back to what you're talking about, John, which is difficulties for developers. I mean, the government are having an inquiry at the moment, aren't they, into sort of price fixing with the big developers. Do you know what? Stay out of it, because those developers, if they charge too much, they won't sell anything.
No.
Their customers won't be able to mortgage them. So just let the market find its feet. That's my view. I think every time the government interferes, it goes wrong.
Yeah.
And gets worse.
Yeah. We've got countless examples of that, and actually even things like the RICS, EWS one form on the back of Grenfell Tower, which was brought in to try and protect them, to do with the external wall cladding and so on. They wanted to protect themselves and lenders. But all it did is just totally smash up the apartment market for not just for people like me in development saloons, but people that were trying to sell a property in an existing block.
I live in a very tall block across the road, and the balcony slats were wood. Yep. So they failed the ES1 test. Yep. Okay. So anyway, developer good as gold said, okay, that's okay, I'll fix it, don't worry, I'm not going to charge anybody. Did it very, very good. Except what turned out was it was a 2-year project, and nobody would sign it off and give the certificate until the very last one had been completed.
And how many apartments were in that block?
600 odd.
That's nuts.
And you see that was a 2-year stall. Anything in that development selling.
So the point is, these initiatives, they come in potentially with the right intentions, but they slow everything down. They cause problems. And actually, you both said it. Keep it fluid. Let the supply and demand almost do the talking, right, without trying to put too many restrictions in place.
Well, it's very clear, John, you should be our housing minister.
And you should be Prime Minister.
Well, there you go. All right. Well, that's all we've got time for in this half of the show. So join me again after the break when we'll be asking Sara and John more of your questions. Hello and welcome back to part 2 of Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin and I'm joined by Sara Newson and John Reynolds. Welcome back, guys. John, how have the previous levels of property investment that London in particular has seen and had from the Asia Pacific areas dropped off significantly, as some commentators report? And if so, what do the panel think is the predominant reason?
That's an interesting question. And I wonder how much of that is based on what's happening here in the UK and what's happening in the rest of the world. I think it's been a lot harder to get money out of the countries that were ultimately big spenders in the UK, China in particular. They worked so hard at that, didn't they? And it's clearly worked. And I think the UK was considered a pretty safe place to invest. It was not particularly volatile compared to the rest of the world. But if you just look at our political mess of the last few years, is that probably the same sentiment? I used to deal with quite a few of the guys that deal with the international sales. I was more dialed in until probably the last year. So without having that information, but I know they're much quieter. And there's certain little pockets that seem to work from a niche product point of view and in certain areas, but they're not the areas, like particularly China, as you say, that were big buyers in this country. So I think it's a mixture of, kind of a geopolitical, issue, as well as then actually the fact that we haven't done ourselves any favours being a particularly attractive place to come and invest and buy, because all our news that's being pumped out is not particularly positive.
Well, the Russians think we're quite an attractive place to put the money, don't they?
I think not anymore.
Possibly not.
Not right now. I mean, it's amazing having this conversation how much has changed from, I was based in the heart of Chelsea as Titan until really recently. And just the amount of Chinese foreign investors that used to all be there, Russians, all actually actively, basing themselves in London and investing, let alone the influx of investors that wanted to deploy their funds here. And that tap has definitely turned off, but how much of that is us and the rest of it? I keep repeating it. I'm not sure what the percentage would be.
Sara, you're somebody who advises on investment and searches for properties for people. Are you finding that market has slowed down, or I'm not sure if in York it was ever that prevalent, was it? Or?
Up north, well, we certainly have a different situation up north. We are seeing a lot of international investment in the northern parts of the UK. So we're certainly giving off the right signals there. Not so much the Chinese market, but we've got a lot of Singaporean investment. And I would say probably about 50% of our sales are to international buyers. There's a lot of demand, mostly sort of new investors, new to the market, but they see that the returns are so much substantially higher here than they are in Singapore. So that's why they're choosing England over investing over there.
Do you think the safety of our property legislation helps too? We're quite a safe country, aren't we? In terms
I think
of that?
so, yes, even though sometimes we give off the wrong signals and it sounds like it's not so. It is, yes, it is. It definitely is. And I think it's very reassuring to them, the market and the type of tenancies that we've got, the type of tenants that we've got. They love HMOs, particularly student HMOs who are in for a year at a time. It's a year-long AST. It's more stable for them in terms of their cash flow and their income.
Are you finding a stronger trend toward HMOs rather than sort of standard buy-to-let?
We have, yeah, even blocks of flats, that we have coming on, which is more of a hands-off passive investment in my mind. We're finding that people want to get into the HMO market. Obviously, you need a very good property manager in place who knows the regulations, who can manage the property well. But yeah, HMOs are just in huge demand, and a lot of that's down to Article 4. There's not enough of them now. Investors are fighting for them. So yeah, definitely finding HMOs are like hotcakes.
So where you are, sort of Article 4 is quite relaxed, is it?
No, afraid not. So York blanket canvassed as soon as the option came in. So within a very short space of time, it was made permitted development. Councils, local councils were given the right to use Article 4 to remove the permitted development, and York did it straight away. So they had the 12-month consultation period. They blanketed the entire city. It was an issue there for them. Hull, not so much. Hull, it came in later. So, and they've done it in 2 stages, and there's still parts where it doesn't exist. But certainly the parts where it does exist around the university, they're in high demand now, these HMOs. Supply and demand is an issue in York, and I would say it's pretty much even in Hull in terms of tenants.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, it is.
Okay, so your actual question is, with there being so many variations and inconsistencies across local authorities nationwide in respect of HMO licensing, do the experts think it's time for a single directive from government on this type of accommodation?
Yes, interesting. I mean, the licensing, there is a base that's provided by the national government in terms of regs and amenities, but then the local council can then go over and above and override those. And so you do need to learn them and speak with each council. If you're going from, for instance, from Hull to York and opening up an HMO, you do need to speak with the local council because they are different, the rules are different. They have their own criteria. One example in Hull was the national government used to have a regulation that stated you needed to have a basin in a bedroom. That was abolished decades ago, but Hull retained it. And so, that's something extra, which, there's a debate over whether it should be or shouldn't be. In my mind, I think it's excessive and unnecessary. In a lot of situations, you've got a bedroom with a bathroom adjacent to it, and they're saying you still need a basin in the room, which is an unnecessary expense. So yes, I do think that there should be more regulation from the national government.
But who within the authority would come up with such a sort of regulation about the basin? Who is it? A planning committee? Is it a single planning officer? Is it a specialist in HMO?
It's the HMO licensing officers and the environmental health department. So they sit down and they agree what they think should be included.
Right. You'd have to ask if they're real humans making such decisions.
Some of these decisions or lack of as well. And
somebody just puts it into AI and seeing what the answer is.
My experience is if you give them a good enough argument and reason not to do it, they come around to it and they're happy with that. But somebody who's just entering the market who doesn't have the experience or a manager who knows this won't contest it and will spend £500-600 putting that vanity unit in. So yeah, they are really amenable and great people to deal with, but some of those rules are just a bit silly and should be abolished. Yeah.
I mean, as far as councils are concerned, I mean, John, we've talked about this before. I'm a great believer in not treating the council or the planning authority as the enemy. Go and speak to them. Go and talk to them. Go and say, look, this is what I want to do. Tell me, please, how I must do it. Let's work together on this. But I do get a lot of feedback about HMO regulations where there is this almost confrontational barrier between the two?
I think my experience of HMOs, which goes back a bit, but I know so many people that are involved in it now, is there's still a stigma of the fact that it's student digs, and even the neighbours. And you have to educate everybody from the council to the neighbours that often these HMOs have done really well now. They're nice people, they're professionals living together.
Some of the ones in London are like hotels.
Exactly.
They really are.
And because of the level of competition, which sounds like Sara knows all about, it's actually, although there's a good level of demand, the actual supply, you've got to be providing good kind of quality accommodation, maybe Sky, sort of mod cons tech, to actually then achieve the price you want and to get the calibre of tenant you want. But the point is they're not what they were long since. So there's still potentially the kind of traditional English landlord that won't spend a penny on his property and it's an old HMO, but they're being priced out of that market that is now really, really professional. And actually the council should be working with that.
Well, they should. They're just not attracting the market, are they? Here in Canary Wharf, 15, 20 years ago, the developing ethos was lots of studios, lots of one bedrooms, because we want to attract the bankers who want to stay in London for the week and then go home to their country places at the weekends. And that worked for a while. But that's an amazing opportunity for HMO accommodation, isn't it? And I keep thinking, with these blocks going up, why doesn't somebody take 2 floors and turn it into a sort of, really upmarket place for people to rent homes in?
No, it's a great idea. You should do it. I think it's consistency. What we're coming down to, Sarah's point about the basins, I think there needs to just be a consistency where whether you're a new landlord coming in or you've been doing it for years, where you can just know you can plan and it's sensible decisions.
Well, I think there does
plan for in the future.
Yeah, there does need to be consistency, and I think the whole sort of planning local authority regime needs to change a little bit. I think we've moved past now, a dozen lay councillors making very complex planning decisions, talking about very complex green activities within the building and construction methods. I think it's all got too complicated. And I think we just need professionals on it, really, don't we? Right the way through.
Yeah.
All right, well, I'm going to say thank you very much to both of you. Sara Newson, MD and founder of Realm 47, John Reynolds, CEO of Titan Developments. Thank you both very much for coming in today.
Thanks, Steve.
Great show, great information. Thank you both.
Thank you.
I'm Stephen Galpin. Join me again next time on Property Question Time. See you then.